All right, we're working through example 1. We are going to solve this system of equations by putting our system in row echelon form, and we're going to solve it after we do that. So that's where we want a 1 in the top left, and then 0, 0, and then a number, a 1, and a 0, and then a number, and a 1. And then these numbers will have to do with the answer we get later. So since the first thing we want is a 1 in that top left corner, we've already taken rows 1 and 3 and traded them. So that's given us our 1 in our top left corner. But now we want a 0 where that 2 is. So to accomplish that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take row 1, and I'm going to designate row 1 with R1. I'm going to multiply row 1 by a -2. So I'm going to multiply row 1 by a -2, and then I'm going to add it to row 2. And what that's going to do is it's going to create a new row 2, and sometimes the notation for that is a capital letter as opposed to the lowercase I have here. So a new row 2. So when I multiply row 1 by a -2 and add it to row 2, I'm then going to replace this current row 2 with a new row 2 that came from adding those together. All right. So let's see what that's going to look like. I'm going to multiply by a -2. Now to help me with not having to write as much down, I usually do this in my head as I write it down. So like -2 times 1 is -2. I add that to 2, and what do I get? 0. So I am doing this process in my head and writing it down. -2 times -1 is +2. And +2 plus -4 is -2, right? So then -2 times +1 is -2, and -2 plus 3 is 1. And then -2 times 5 is -10, and -10 plus 16 is 6. We've created a new row 2 by taking our row 1, and technically here's what we did, is we did -2 times 1, -2 times -1, -2 times 1, -2 times 5, and we added those numbers to these numbers, and we got our new row 2 by adding those together, right? So I don't usually show this work, but I'm showing it because I want to make sure everyone understands where these numbers in my new second row came from. Now, did I really want to get rid of row 1? Did I want row 1 to start with a -2? No, I want row 1 to start with a 1 like it did before I did this whole multiply by a -2 thing. So make sure your row 1 stays like it was before. We're not replacing it. We just temporarily multiplied it by a -2 to add it to row 2 so that we could get a 0. All right, so now can you guys, using that example, tell me what I should do to get a 0 in row 3 right here? What should I do to get a 0 here where this 3 is? So according to that chart on our previous page, our next step is to get a 1 right here in the middle. Ooh, what do we think? What can we do to get a 1 right there in the middle? I know that my next step is to get a 0 here below the middle. And I think I can get that 0 pretty easily by just adding those rows together right now. In fact, I sort of wish that my bottom row was in the middle row, because if it was, then that bottom row I could just take and multiply the whole thing by 1/2, and that would give me a 1 without giving me any fractions. If I do that to this middle row and I multiply the whole thing by 1/2, I'm going to have a 1/2 in there, which is okay. Should we do that? Or should we try to avoid the fractions and trade the rows first? I don't know if you see my reasoning for wanting to trade the rows, or if that just makes it more confusing. I don't know, what do you think? Opinions? See, these are the reason I think these are cool, is because it's not like other math where it's like you have to do certain things a certain way, there are decisions to be made, and maybe that's why students don't like it. It's good to do these are so good for your brain and for problem solving. Like, even if this is nothing you're ever going to use in real life, to solve real life problems, obviously not. This is just like good thinking and problem solving skills. Following some basic instructions, but then making your own decisions for how to enact those rules. So, trade or just a fraction? Trade or fraction? That's what we need to decide. Okay, Danny is the one who spoke, so we are going to trade them. So we're just going to trade our row 2 and row 3. I'm going to rewrite this as 1, -1, 1, 5. The first row stays the same place. I'm going to trade, so I have 2, -2, 12, and 0, 2, -2, sorry, +1, 6. Now, sometimes it's okay to do things a little out of order. So I'm going to add row 2 to row 3. Before I even have that 1 in the middle, I'm going to add those together. And that's because that will give me my 0. So the guideline for when to get what numbers is just a guideline. If you see something that actually makes it easier before, without following that guideline and doing it your own way, then do it. So I'm going to add these together. 0 plus 0 is 0. 2 plus -2 is 0. -2 plus 1 is -1. And 12 plus 6 is 18. All I did was add those together. We already had a +2 and a -2 that turned that into 0 just like I wanted it to be. My gosh, we are almost done here. So now we're going to go 1/2 times row 2. See how cool that is? 1/2 times row 2. What is that going to do to our row 2? It's going to put it exactly where we want it to be. So row 2 is going to be 0. 2 times 1/2 is 1. -2 times 1/2 is -1. 12 times 1/2 is 6. Then for our bottom row, we want a 1 in that bottom corner. What can we do without even having to write this down again? We can do a -1 times row 3. So -1 times 0 is 0. -1 times 0 is 0. -1 times -1 is 1. And -1 times 18 is -18. Look, this is in row echelon form. We have put it where we want it. Now we could keep going and get the other zeros in this top corner. In fact, they wouldn't be too difficult to start adding stuff backwards. Like, we can add row 3 to row 2 now, and because we have these zeros, if you add a 0 to a 0, that doesn't change that 0. Add a 0 to a 1, it doesn't change that 1. But add the 1 to the -1, and now we have a 0 right where we want it. Add your -18 to your 6, so you have a -12. We just found out that y equals -12 by starting to put this in reduced row echelon form. But the instructions just say row echelon form, so let's go ahead and finish this as is. So what this part right here means is that z equals -18. We have found one of the answers through this process. Now we just have to take y minus z, based on this equation right here, right? And z is a -18, and that will equal 6. So that would be a +18, and we're going to subtract that from both sides. So that would give us y equals, what I just said was -12, right? Which we could have actually found easier just by adding those rows together. Now that we know that y equals -12, now we can go back up to our top row and you do x minus y, which is -12, plus z, which is -18, equals 5. Combine those together, so that would be a +12 minus 18, so -6. Add the -6 to both sides, and x will equal 11. So we've got our solution, x equals 11, y equals negative 12, z equals negative 18. Usually we're going to write the answer like this, 11, negative 12, negative 18. So instead of an ordered pair, it's an ordered triple. X, Y, Z, it's like three-dimensional graphing. And there we did it. We solved our equation by using upper triangular form or row echelon form. We talked about how we could continue the next step into doing reduced row echelon form if we wanted to. And that is this section. This is the hardest section of chapter 6.